Hi there, my name is Kellen and I'm a solution engineer here at Make. Today, we're going to discuss advanced error handling topics, including how Make handles errors out of the box, so if it automatically retries or if the execution will stop depending on the error type. Then, we'll go into an advanced error handling scenario where I will build it step by step and show how you can handle different errors depending on the different error type with nested error handling. And then finally, we'll go into error logging. So initially, when you're building out scenarios, it's difficult to determine where you should add error handling. So it's very important to log where these errors are happening on a recurring basis so that you can go back into the scenario and design an error handling route depending on how errors have been coming into the scenario. So we have a lot to cover today, so let's dive right in. To begin, let's discuss how Make processes errors out of the box. We can go to this help article, and we can notice that there are two different types of errors that Make will automatically retry when they occur. Those would be connection errors and rate limit errors. We'll go into connection errors first. And what a connection error typically is the third-party service that you're looking to connect with is not available at that time. Typically, it'll be a 400 or 500 error, and Make will automatically retry these in increasing time intervals. This is known as exponential backoff. So when that type of error occurs, Make will try after 10 minutes, 1 hour, 3 hours, 12 hours, and 24 hours. And the reason for that is so that Make isn't using excess amount of operations for repeatedly failed scenarios. So typically, when it retries in this interval period, that service will have repaired itself, and when you go to reattempt, it should automatically fix itself. Now, there are a couple additional pieces that I would like to note here. First is if the error occurs on the first module, the execution of the scenario is terminated with a warning message. Make will, by default, have these warning messages disabled within your email settings. So if you go to your name down at the bottom, profile, email preferences, you are able to turn on the warning message emails so that you're notified when this warning occurs and so that you can get on it as soon as possible. Another piece to it is the allow storing of incomplete executions. So you'll notice that if there's an error that occurs outside of the first module, it's dependent on if this setting is enabled within your settings or not. If it is enabled, that execution will be stored in the incomplete executions folder. If it's not, then the scenario will end and it'll be followed by a rollback phase. So as a quick reminder, to go into your scenarios to add some incomplete executions as the setting, you will have to do this on each scenario. So you can go into settings and allow storing of incomplete executions on. From there, any incomplete execution will be stored within this incomplete executions folder. Going back to the error processing help documentation, the next error is the rate limit error. And again, Make does automatically retry this. You'll notice here that it handles it the same way the connection error is handled. And here, the rate limit error typically happens when you are trying to do too many actions and there is a limit set by the service provider and that has been exceeded. So an example that's very common is you're trying to upload too many files per minute, and that service that you're looking to upload those files has set a limit that says you can only do a certain amount of files per minute there. The first one that we'll dive into is data errors. So if we scroll down here, we'll see that a data error occurs when the item is mapped incorrectly. A common example of this is Twitter says that you can only have 280 characters with a tweet, and you try to create one with 295. So wherever that error occurs within the scenario, if you have incomplete execution stored, that will be stored within incomplete executions. One piece to note here is if you need the scenarios to be processed sequentially, so one scenario runs today and it needs to be processed before the next one that's scheduled to run tomorrow, that's another piece in the settings that you need to enable. Otherwise, the scenarios will continue to run. So in order to enable sequential processing, you can go into the settings, and it's up here at the top. So sequential processing, you can flip this over to yes. The second error that make will not automatically retry is a duplicate data error. So just below, the duplicate data error is when you're trying to insert a record into another system, and that record already exists, and that system does not allow duplicate data. So oftentimes this is when you're creating a contact, for example, and that contact's email address is the unique ID and it already exists in the platform. The one thing that you can do to avoid that is doing a search by the contact email before you do the create. Sometimes different applications will have an upsert option where it will create or update depending on existence, but it's general best practice to search within the system first by the unique ID and then do a router and create or update depending on if it exists or if it doesn't. Next is the invalid access token error, and that's typically when the API key or access token has been revoked, but the scenario is still set to run. And when that happens, the scenario will stop immediately at the point of error, and it will be stored in incomplete executions if it is turned on. Then we have the incomplete data error, which we can see down here, and this only happens with the trigger. So a common example is if the trigger is getting a Google photo that is currently being uploaded, or a Google video that is taking time, we're trying to grab it and it's currently being uploaded, so it's unavailable or incomplete. With this, the make scenario will stop immediately when the error occurs, and it will be dependent on how many consecutive errors that you denote within make that you would like it to take. That setting is within the make scenario here, into settings, show advanced settings, and here you can set number of consecutive errors to any number that you would like, depending on how many times you would like it to retry. The last one that we'll cover is the runtime error, which is if any other error occurs that was not mentioned above, and it will be marked as a runtime error. Some things to note here is if it ends with a runtime error, the same thing will happen depending on how many consecutive errors that you say within the settings there. That's how many times that it'll run again. And if it starts with an instant trigger, so there's some sort of webhook that the scenario starts with, that consecutive errors setting will be ignored. So to sum everything up today, there are multiple different error types and make will handle them differently. There are two error types that make will handle automatically, and those would be the rate limit error and the connection error. All other types of errors within make will not be automatically retried, but there are certain things that you can do in order to make sure that no data is lost. General best practices, make sure to look through the documentation of the applications that you are integrating with. You can get out in front of a lot of these error types by just being generally knowledgeable about some common errors that might occur when you're working with that API. I hope this was helpful, and next we will dive into an advanced error handling scenario with nested error handling.